Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dominic Piper. I'm the editor of Pay Dirt and Gold Mining Journal and your session chair for this session, ESG. We've got 30 minutes to debate the entire ESG conundrum and solve everything in that next 30 minutes. So panellists haven't got much of a job on their hands at all. I should really introduce our panellists first. Starting immediately to my left is Namali Mackay, who's Managing Director of the newly formed Critical Minerals Association of Australia. Previously, Namali spent 15 years in London, most recently leading Austrade's critical minerals agenda there. She's a former Australian diplomat and trade negotiator covering the trade, industry, resource and climate portfolios during that posting there in the Australian High Commission in London. Thanks, Namali, for joining us. Next to Namali is Len Kolff, acting CEO of Atlantic Lithium. Len has more than 25 years' experience in the design, implementation and execution of exploration, resource evaluation and project studies and appraisals within the major and the junior resources sector. Len's had a particular focus on Africa right through that period. Most recently, he's been working in West Africa. He was instrumental in the discovery and evaluation of Atlantic's, I can never remember how to pronounce it, Len. Is it Iwaya? Awuya. I was close. Awuya lithium project in Ghana, which we'll be hearing more about tomorrow, as well as the Moffee Creek iron ore project in Liberia. And he's worked, as we said, extensively in West Africa. Next to Len, I'm not going to take too much time, otherwise we won't have any time, but Scott Williamson, who you've met earlier today, mining engineer in commerce with a commerce degree from the West Australian School of Mines and Curtin University, and more than 10 years experience. You must be updating this by now, 10 years in technical and corporate roles. We move on next to Claire Montoni. Claire joined Digby, our sponsors for this session, in 2023, earlier this year, leading up the APAC region and bringing more than 18 years experience in capital markets, corporate development and ESG strategy. Digby's mission, for those who don't, and we'll see in the posters go up now, is to make mining better. And I'm sure Claire will talk about that a little bit more. And that really resonated with her, I believe, when you came to join the company. Having completed the CFA ESG qualifications in 2022, and prior to joining Digby, Claire was involved in global investment banking and M&A across multiple sectors. And at the very end, we've got another Claire Wilson, ESG manager at Liontown. Now Claire's biography is going to be much shorter because she only just sent me it due to my problems. But it's suffice to say, Claire, that you've been in the industry for more than 10 years now, working in the environmental space in particular, but ESG more broadly as well, with the likes of Fortescue, Silver Lake and Kalium Lake. So, as you can see, very esteemed panellists. Like I say, we haven't got lots of time. But we've got lots to touch on, and if there's any questions out there, please, after I've had Margot first, please raise your hands and we'll have the roving microphones around. But I suppose the easiest place to start, and I might start with you, Namali, as the director of the Critical Minerals Association here in Australia. ESG performance and sustainability performance is increasingly imperative for every resources company. But it seems it's even more of an imperative for battery minerals and critical minerals companies. Is that fair to say?
It's a really good question, and I think we would actually say that it's not specific to battery minerals companies. It's something that should be undertaken across the board. So essential, yes, but across the board, I guess is what we would say. And our view is very much that it's a journey. It's a journey that everyone has to embark on. At various stages of development, companies may not be in the same place, and it's obviously, not a tick box exercise. So it's a long-term process, yeah.
Len, can I ask you, do you feel, working in Ghana, you've worked in lots of different commodities in West Africa, do you feel that ESG focus or scrutiny is stronger on a company that is exploring and developing a lithium project than it is for other commodities?
Look, I definitely agree with what Namali said. I don't think the commodity type is from my perspective, is a driving force around focusing more on ESG. It may be from the outside inwards, but I think in terms of implementing your ESG strategy, irrespective of commodity, is critical right from the beginning. When we first step on the ground at our projects in Africa, like we did in Ghana back in 2016, and getting it right early is important on that journey, and it is a journey that develops as a project develops. I mean, you may walk away from that project and not make a discovery, but it's what you've left behind as that legacy, irrespective of what the outcome is of that journey, which is important. So it's respect and integrity and honesty with your communities.
Scott, I suppose you'd agree with that. Watching your presentation this morning, you made much of green nickel and the renewable and non-carbon power opportunity in Vietnam. Do you feel that you can more easily address that those ESG principles by being a battery company?
I think it definitely helps. I think if I was a gold miner in the current sort of environment, it is a lot harder to sort of, I suppose, from an investor's perspective, sort of stand out. We were lucky that we did stand out, and we attracted investment from Fidelity, and that really pushed us in the right direction. They have a big focus on ESG, and also we've attracted BlackRock as well. So it's really investor-led, and I don't think it's commodity specific. It's definitely easier to stand out though when you've got abundant renewable power. So we're very lucky on that front. But yeah, I think it's definitely not commodity specific. It's investor-led. I suppose from our perspective, it's also customer-led. So our batteries will end up in electric vehicles. And there's definitely a customer focus on ESG as well.
Claire, I may come back to you in 2 seconds because I want to ask you a little bit further about how the role that Digby can play in this. I might come to you, Liontown, Claire, to begin with.
Sure.
To respond to that, we just heard from Adam and the great work you're doing on the ground there, with both with community and on the environmental side.
Yeah.
Have you felt a shift in moving into a different commodity?
So straight up, Liontown is probably the most forward-looking company I've ever worked for in regards to environment, heritage, all of those kinds of things. I think as a lithium producer, we must lead the charge in ESG value. We must. From a circularity perspective, what we do on the ground and how we manage carbon, how we manage land disturbance, how we engage with our traditional land owners. All that information will be provided to our, to the people who are buying our products. That information is then going to be provided to the people who are going to be purchasing their products. So, I was talking with Tesla a few weeks ago, and they want to know how much land we're clearing, how much carbon we're releasing when we do that. And there will be a QR code on their batteries that people can scan, and it will tell them what we have done, what has contributed to this battery being made. And I think from that perspective, ESG and lithium have to go together and have to be the driving forces in the mineral sector.
Thanks, Claire. Claire Montori. I should have set you apart, really. It's going to be very... There's often a joke at mining conferences that there's more Peters on the programme than there is women. And this time I'm glad to say there's as many Claires as there is men on this podium now. Claire, can I ask you about where Digby fits in this immediately? I'm sure there's a few people in the room who don't know the work that you've been doing so far, and I know you've done some work with Blackstone and others. Can you explain in a broader sense what you bring to the equation?
Sure, thank you for that. So Digby's purpose, as you say, is to make mining better, and how we do that is through building a platform that maps operational level data to the 30 plus standards or mining specific standards and frameworks. The Digby accreditation, as an example, provides investment decision makers, and I think that's quite relevant to the question you posed, with an indication via a robust and objective assessment as to who they might be investing in. Now, I think everyone said a similar thing on the panel. There'll be leaders and laggards, no matter how companies are assessed. Investor expectations are shifting each and every day, and that's where Digby steps in. We can assist companies with getting on the front foot rather than just letting your public disclosure be assessed by bots on the internet. We can actually provide that robust assessment.
It strikes me as a really important area, because we talked to many junior companies and emerging mid-tier companies about how they're tackling sustainability, and while they have a long track record of doing fantastic things on the ground, we're seeing that it's a real challenge to report to standards that are acceptable by international investors, or even, as Claire was saying, customers. Is that gap that you're filling then in being able to not only show performance but report it to standards that are going to be applicable?
Exactly, that's exactly right. And there's obviously an element of commodity specific, which I think is where your question was going to. I think there's almost from an investor perspective, there's a minimum expectation when you have an ESG integration approach to things, and then you might have an investment thematic that could be a transition. You might be a transition fund investing in clean tech or net zero technology, whatever that might be. From an extraction company perspective, though, they're often unable to invest in them due to biodiversity. So it's very complex. It's not something, as you can say here, you can just rest on your laurels and suggest that I'm a clean tech company or a green nickel. Yeah. And I think that's why Scott particularly got involved with Digby.
Scott, did you feel that you were that investors or potential customers were overlooking you because you weren't able to report to the same? You haven't got an ESG division like a Rio Tinto or a BHP may have.
Yeah, so very early we went down on this journey, and I think the first step is always to build a sustainability report, and we did that with the help of some externals, but it was one or two people in the organisation pulled that together, and a lot of hard work went into that, and that was sort of the first, I suppose, step, and that's a great starting point is that sustainability report, and I think that was the moment where, okay, we're serious about this, and we probably did it a little bit earlier than a lot of juniors, but it was something that we wanted to focus on, and without that sustainability report, you definitely you're definitely not focused of the bigger institutions.
Len, would you share a similar sentiment? Have you had to adapt the way you present your sustainability outcomes to suit the market conditions?
Yeah, I definitely think so. In our case, we're kind of embarking on that journey now. So we do have a lot in our presentation and speak a lot around ESG, but how do you actually measure it? That's where it gets hard. On the environmental front, from our perspective, our project does deliver in terms of carbon footprint because of where we are, the nature of the mineralisation, and even from a water use sustainability point of view. And there are providers out there that can actually measure what your carbon footprint is and present that across your peers. So that I think is a very powerful tool. But it's the S part in the ESG, which is a really difficult concept to get across and to report to shareholders in a meaningful way, and how you compare yourself against your peers. But has a profound impact on the ground and a lasting impact with your communities. And we always used to speak about social license to operate, which is, certainly in the case of Africa, is hugely important. So, from our case now, we're definitely moving down that line, and speaking to the likes of Digby, and there are certainly other providers out there, but it's integrating those measurables, especially around carbon, and water, I think, is equally as important, which in our case, sets our project apart from our peers. So I think that's when it starts to get really powerful. And then those measurable aspects around the governance aspect and the delivery of a half-yearly or yearly sustainability report is a very powerful tool.
I wanted to ask you, can I just follow up on that? The idea of competing priorities in the sustainability or ESG space. Do you find that the priorities you have on the ground with your host communities and host government are different to those that investors prioritise in their own assessment?
It depends. Generally, as an overall comment, I'd say yes, but every investor is different, and what they focus on is different. In terms of the communities, even with the communities around where the actual project footprint is, in our case, it's around jobs, youth employment, environmental, schooling, dust, all of those aspects. And in the case of Ghana, the government does have strong regulation in that regard around the EPA. But in Ghana's perspective as well, from the government's perspective, it's also that whole decarbonisation thematic that they're pretty keen on grabbing as well, to be a forerunner in Africa as part of this whole journey. Whereas on the investment space, the decarbonisation aspect, and I think also the water sustainability aspect is probably higher on the agenda, because it's a more common theme currently. But social is, in my view, just as important.
Claire Wilson, how does that apply in Western Australia? Is that Jawar people, as your native title, partners on this project? Are they conscious of lithium and the future it's contributing to? Or does it resonate in a way that is materially different to other commodities?
I personally can't speak on behalf of Jawar, but what I can say is that the relationship that we have built with Jawar over the last 5 years, I would say, is very much built on mutual benefit and collaboration. You asked about their involvement, and I'm sure Adam touched on this, but from the get-go, they have been involved in the design. I've spent the past week out on country with them, going through the updates to the changes to the project, hearing them, their concerns, protection of their sites. The relationship and that we will continue to foster with them is definitely very positive, and I think they can see the benefits of what lithium will mean to them. We have relationship meetings where we talk about those things. But yeah, I certainly can't make an informed comment on how they personally feel.
Namali, I suppose it's part of your remit at the Critical Minerals Association that future-facing commodities, critical minerals, battery minerals companies have an opportunity to promote a mining sector that sits slightly apart from the traditional idea of ranking up there with tobacco companies and weapons manufacturers as a scourge of society. But here's an opportunity for mining to be a force for good, if you like. Is that one of the areas that you're pursuing at the association?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is we're an association that has counterpart organisations in the US, UK, and Canada, and so ESG is probably our very most common and most fundamental pillar across all of those organisations, and it's one in which we, I guess what we would advocate, particularly for Australia, and Claire number one here touched on it, is that there are so many standards and frameworks out there. And for junior companies, that's very, very challenging. Our view is very much that there shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all. There shouldn't be a sort of industry standard, as it were. What we would rather see is companies complying within their ability to a basic set of principles, either driven by finance markets or their own, where they're operating. So it's to answer your question though, yeah, it's absolutely, driving the green energy transition, and it's something where we're very focused on having a group of companies that are non-fossil fuel based and very forward facing, yeah.
Claire Martoni, can I ask you on a similar question, but particularly on what Len mentioned about the difficulty in measuring the social aspect of ESG. How does Digby approach that?
So Digby has a large number of questions, and the information that's provided is mapped through. We actually do cover the social aspect and across a lot more than simply decarbonisation. And ultimately it comes through with a report to the company, and then that independent assessment that can be published at the client's, as I said before, so it empowers the client as opposed to simply a rating agency coming along and coming up with a view.
Scott, I suppose your Len's comments resonate with you again, operating in Vietnam around the social aspect as well as the environment.
Yeah, a big focus from our investors on the social impact, and we're very lucky that we have a brownfields project, so we can leverage off all of the great work that was done previously. So previous operators looked after the community, they looked after the environment. So yeah, we're coming in with a bit of a head start, which is great, and that was done by Australian operators. So we're very lucky that we've got that good history in country. Our subsidiary entity has been operating in country for 20 years and has a really strong relationship with the local people. I think for us, from the Digby report, it was actually corporate governance was probably something that we, as a junior, it's always hard to get those corporate governance frameworks in place, and we've pushed pretty hard on that. And I think that's, yeah, for most juniors, that's probably the one where it takes a lot of effort to get the corporate governance to a standard that's acceptable for the major institutions.
Yep.
Can you hear me? I was just going to add to that point, and I don't know, Claire from Digby, if you would agree with this, but there is often a bit of, at a general industry level, sort of misunderstanding about the G. And just to your point, the G isn't just that we are a government that has, and a jurisdiction that has good governance principles. It's all about that corporate governance that you're talking about, and the importance of having it from the board level all the way down, and having it embedded in the company.
Claire, did you want to add to that one?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, not particularly into the detail of which elements, but the corporate governance side of things is certainly part of that process, and it's a critical part of it because, again, from the investor perspective, you're not looking at just a jurisdictional analysis. You do need to be able to compare. That relativity is crucial, and that's the value that's created by having that Digby accreditation. I wouldn't mind just adding another point to that. It's not just about the relativity of any peers in a point in time. What's critically important, and the value that you get out of the Digby platform, is that you can see, or the investors can also see, that progress through time. So it goes to that commitment and trust that we spoke about before. Yeah,
that journey again of being transparent and showing where you've stumbled perhaps, or where you've room for improvement.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think that's a question that in my very short time there, I've had a few clients ask, when is too early? And I think many of the people I've spoken to would say that they all feel quite ready now, because again, it does empower the client with a bit of a gap analysis, if you like, of where they can start to focus their energy, perhaps shape that sustainability report, and then build that trust with investors or financiers. We were quite fortunate recently, as an example, but Nexitus is a leading provider of project finance. So while we've got a number of explorers as clients, increasingly we're seeing producers or developers coming through. And this particular group said that having a Digby accreditation, this is hot off the press, so I'm going to make sure I get it right, but you can actually reduce the time it takes to meet Nexitus's equator principles. The requirements around the equator principles can cut that time by up to 6 months. So there's those types of individual around that corporate governance and that activity that is required. You can do it once, you can set your direction, and then you've got crystal clarity on that journey moving forward.
Claire Wilson, that is an interesting point, given you were hired, as an ESG manager, hired quite early in the process, really, given the development of Kathleen Valley. What advantages did it feel too early to you, and what advantages has it brought now that, further down the track?
Enviros should be employed at the very, very beginning of a project. We have this ability to see the project from a really big, broad perspective, and we can identify very quickly where your limiting areas are. This area is going to be difficult, this is going to be great. Getting out, talking with the traditional owners, getting field surveys undertaken early. What this means is you can drive your approvals, you can drive your outcomes to the project's needs from the get-go. I think the more that companies identify the role that the environment and heritage and ESG space can, benefit them, I think you'll start to see enviros and ESG professionals, I guess, come into the picture much sooner. The other thing, I guess, to add to that is that working with Adam at that point meant that as new people and your senior management team come into play, we've already kind of set the bar about what we expect from them and what we expect from their team. This is the culture we're building. Tony talks about ESG being in our DNA, and whilst that sounds probably really corny to people, it really genuinely is. I don't know if Adam talked about the reduction in Mount Mann pit size, but that came off the back end of a general comment I had with the mining engineer about our ESG and our relationship with Jawal and the environment and things like that. And a few weeks later, he came back and he goes, I reckon we can save Mount Mann. And sure enough, our pit went from 13 hectares, taking out that entire landscape, to 3. I was on country, I said it before, earlier this week, and one of the guys said to me, oh, when are you taking Mount Mann out? And I said, we're not. And he goes, what do you mean? I was like, we've discussed this, come on, guys. And I said, no, that's the extent of the pit. And 15 Jawal people just kind of stopped in their tracks and was like, oh. And that is what early ESG, bringing us into the team early, sharing that knowledge, getting out there what our philosophy are, what we believe in as a company, what our values are. This is the outcome that you can get. Now we're catching up with all the policies, procedures and things like that, but
And I suppose, Scott, you might take this one, that when you're looking for investment, as Claire was mentioning earlier, and also ultimately customers, they're going to want to see that journey in for all its transparency, and they're going to be looking for skeletons in the closet, if you like, around sustainability.
Yeah, and I think that's why the Digby report is so powerful, because it is very transparent. There's things that we're not doing well. There's things that we are doing well, and it's on our website, so you can go and see it. We've got some work to do, but yeah, we're doing pretty well for where we're at as a company. So the customers want to see this. They also want to see your life cycle analysis of your carbon, all of your products, and you combine that with your Digby report, your sustainability report. They want to see it all, and it's probably one of the most important parts of our data room when we're talking to customers is our ESG reporting.
Great, thanks. Well, we've only got a couple of minutes. I told you I'd be greedy with my questions, so we've only got a couple of minutes to go. Have we got any comments or questions from the floor? Gonna make me keep working. Oh, yeah, we have got one just down here, Vidi.
Hi there. I guess, you've been talking about ESG, and a question that I had was around waste reduction. So how much, obviously there's been massive tailings dam failures globally in the past few years, which has really highlighted the importance of kind of reducing waste volumes. So I guess just in terms of, the work that you're all doing, how much is that featuring in your considerations? And as a follow-up to that, how much have you seen the uptake of exploring for critical metals and minerals in mine waste as a part of that kind of general story? Thank you.
Len, did you want to take that one first?
Okay, I'll be talking in regards to our project in Ghana. So it's a lithium pegmatite, and the pegmatite itself lends itself to DMS process flow sheets, so we don't need to go down flotation routes, so we're not creating massive tailings dams. However, we do generate a spodumene concentrate. We generate what we call DSO fines, or natural fines, which there's currently a market for, which you can sell into the market, and they're then processed through flotation to a spodumene concentrate, generally. But then we produce byproducts as well in the form of feldspar, which there's a strong market for in terms of ceramics. So that's actually something that we would like to sell into the market. And in the case of Ghana, there's an existing ceramics industry in the fastest growing populous centre on the planet, on that coastline from Nigeria through to Ghana and Ivory Coast. So there's a huge growing market there for white goods in the form of toilets, sinks, tiles to feed that growing population. And that's a huge benefit for us because we don't have that waste in that regard, and it builds a sustainable industry that will outlive the lithium mine. And then our final, our final waste stream from the processing of the pegmatite is quartz, which we provide to the communities in terms of building sand. So really our waste footprint is very small, and that's just symptomatic with the style of mineralisation we're dealing with. It's inert. We don't have sulfide in our wall rocks. So ultimately we have a waste dump from the waste rocks in the schist, in form of schists. But it lends itself very well in terms of reducing waste footprints, and we don't produce anything else other than a spodumene concentrate and a feldspar product that goes into the ceramics industry.
Scott or Claire, did you want to take?
Yeah. From a nickel perspective, we're looking at a co-disposal waste dump and tailings, dry stack tailings. There's a real movement away from conventional tailings, and we saw that pretty early on, and this minimises our footprint. It will cost us a little bit extra from a capital perspective, but it allows us to minimise our waste footprint and minimise relocation of community. And so, and the downstream level, we recycle everything. There's no discharge at all. So, it's a big focus of ours, and I think the nickel industry in general is I think needs to move towards these hydromet technologies which are out there, which are much cleaner and better suited to recycling.
Thanks, Scott. Claire Martoni, we might finish. We're nearly finished, so we might come over to you. It's a really interesting point about tailings and wastage, but also that entire circular economy of recycling, and there's a whole areas we haven't touched on, traceability and so forth. But perhaps I can ask you about that circular economy and traceability. Recycling? How important is that going to be in the coming decade in the mining sector?
Oh, well, thank you for giving me a new question. I just frantically look for some facts and figures here. I think it is more important because I don't have an answer for the recycling just at this moment. Sure. Well, from a DIGME perspective anyway, personally I think it will be increasingly important, and regardless of whether it's complying with the global industry standards on tailings management or whether it's around recycling, it's going to be around that disclosure piece that I think will be important, and that, I guess, again, operational level data that you can trust and that you can you don't need to sort of just hold on tight and hope for the best. You can actually trust that what you're disclosing will be adequate for the investors, but any stakeholders will be useful. And I was just going to suggest that, so Adam Matthews, whose official title is the Chief Responsible Investment Officer at the Church of England Pension Board, very active in the space of ensuring there is stewardship principles, and is very active in the space of ensuring that the standards are complied with. He's actually been instrumental in standing up an institute that will see that the tailings standard is complied with. So again, my colleagues in London are working with him very closely to ensure that we're aligning and supporting that disclosure piece. Because a lot of, the reality is miners or mining companies are doing a lot of positive things. They're often not getting the credit for it in perhaps the capital markets, which is where I've found it most intriguing. There you go. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Have we got? I'll allow one more comment because I know it's we go that way then. We'll do two then.
Hello. Hello, son. Thanks, panel, for a really great, interesting discussion. I just, in particular for lithium, I think somebody said 55% of the world's lithium is coming from WA, essentially. Pretty much all of it, almost, at the moment, concentrate. We call it concentrate, but it's 95% waste when it gets to the other end and gets processed. It's not a question, but it's the next phase, I think, of challenge. And I see Claire Liontown smiling.
I literally had this conversation with our project director 2 days ago and saying that we probably need to look at more of what we do onshore rather than, and we're sending it on boats across. So if you pull that together and we're sending boats, we're sending ore, we've got to truck at places, we really need to be looking at what we're doing locally and how we're going to process locally. And
questionable practices with dealing with that at the upper end of your concentrate customers, not all, of course.
yes, of course there is. Yep. Yep.
Great, thanks. Vidi, we've just got one more.
Naturally, organisations are focused on their own ESG strategies and policies. How much importance do you hold on your supply partners' ESG credentials and their strategies?
That's a good one. Scott and...
I think the industry is very good at managing Scope 1 and Scope 2, but I think as an industry we need to do a lot more work on Scope 3. And what we've found is the supply partners are just not ready for it, and so it's an industry-wide issue. Blackstone shouldn't be leading the way on that sort of thing. I think it's a major issue, the fact that we're not focusing on Scope 3 at all as an industry.
It's a great question, thank you. I'm glad I allowed you to ask it before lunch. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. We're sticking so close to schedule, I think we should try and hold that. But I think we should thank our panellists for a fantastic discussion. It could have gone on for hours, I think. Namali, Len, Scott, Claire and Claire. Thank you. Lunch will be served outside just now. And we'll see you again in, I think it's just half an hour for session, 20 minutes even for session 3. Thank you.